Hello and welcome to the CEO Activist podcast. This is a special series where I have the opportunity to meet with and interview a number of inspirational CEOs all around the UK who are leading UK and global organisations. We're talking about diversity as a commercial lever for economic growth and prosperity, and in particular, why it is critical that we as leaders and CEOs empower others to make a true and sustainable difference. Today, I'm joined by Liz Benison, CEO of ISS UK and Ireland. We're going to be talking about everything from the role of gender, equity, parenthood, care and responsibilities, the different life stages that one goes through in order to get to the top and where they are today. I'm really excited to be joined by Liz. So Liz, it's really great.
It's been a while. We've been trying to set this up for a while, haven't we? So yeah, great to be finally doing it.
I finally tracked you down.
I think it's you. You were in New York just last week.
So Liz, before we kind of get started into CEO activism and what that means, what would be so wonderful is for you to tell us a little bit about how you came to be where you are today, because it has been a pretty interesting adventure, hasn't it?
It has, yeah, absolutely. So, go back to 18, hadn't a clue what I wanted to do at all. My dad was an accountant, my sister was trained as an architect. I was kind of, I had no idea what I wanted to do. Ended up doing an engineering degree, mainly because I just didn't know what else I wanted to do. Went to work for Jaguar. Jaguar sponsored me through university. Kind of actually met the CEO, a guy called John Egan at the time, very inspirational, and kind of thought, that's what I want to do. How do I get to do that? And then, 20 or 30 years go by and lots of different steps. I did the startup thing before it was a sort of fashionable thing. So I worked for Ford first for 5 years, which is a great kind of finishing school, business finishing school. I then did the startup thing before it was really sort of trendy. Went to a sort of 50-man startup for a few years. Got my sort of buzz for sales and a bit of entrepreneurialism, and that was brilliant. And then I've gradually just run bigger and bigger bits of businesses, really. This is what I like doing. I like the breadth of it. I like doing sales one day. I love the people side. I love the client management side. And it's only really through that sort of general management career that you get to keep doing all of that. And that's what I really love about it.
Wow. Do you know what I love is that you say this in such an informal and casual way that you happen to be in automotive, which actually, as we well know, we love the automotive industry. My husband works in the automotive industry, but actually it's an incredibly male-dominated arena.
Yeah.
And so take us back to some of those early years.
I mean, some of
was it challenging?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, some of it, when I look back now, I sort of cringe at and it makes you realise we have come a long way, actually. So, because at Jaguar I did a proper apprenticeship, so I had the situation where I had to wear overalls every day, but they didn't do them in my size, so I had to wear a belt and sort of tuck them over a belt, and then I'd get told off for wearing the belt. It was the alternative is they're kind of down to my knees. The shoes started 2 sizes bigger than my feet, so I had to wear sort of 3 pairs of socks every day. I remember one day I had a brilliant project. One of my summer vacations during university, I was in charge of a fleet of prototype cars, new XJS Jaguars, and I had 6 of them that I had to ferry to different places around the country to get either photo shoots done or a different piece of work done on them. And I'd had a really bad day one day, and one of the jobs had fallen through, and I was sort of sat at my desk like this, and I had literally this guy come up to me, put his arms around me, and say, "Don't worry, dear. Wouldn't it be easier just to have a family?" And I sort of look back now and I think, well, at least it's not okay to say those sorts of things anymore. So it was incredibly hard, but there's also benefits. I was a novelty, and therefore you stand out. And I learned pretty early on to take advantage of that. There were 20 guys and me on that programme. Guess who they remembered? They remembered me. And I did take advantage of that, I think in a good way. But I think that's one of the things is you've got to use this, when there is an upside to being in a different group, you've got to use that too, as well as navigating the downsides.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it is that difference. That is the superpower, ultimately.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That helps not only clearly in this instance, an example, help you stand out from the crowd, but also make you rememberable for the future and for the programs, because actually it is, it's the skill, it's the will, it's all of those things, but also it's the unique power of difference.
Absolutely. And I think, it takes a long time to realise it's a superpower, doesn't it, and really play to it. And that's the frustrating thing. You think, if I'd realised that 20 years sooner, where could I have got to? And when I'm talking, I've got a 21-year-old daughter, and when I'm talking to her, that's what the conversations I'm having with her. Make sure you realise that now.
And so you're a mother, you're a wife, you're a daughter, you're a leader, you're a boss. You're managing many different, and increasing in the modern business world, different stakeholder communities. Oh my goodness. How do you manage to stay sane?
So the parent thing, I mean, we could talk for hours about that bit. I'm at that stage now, 21-year-old daughter, 25-year-old son. So it's different, it's quite interesting at home now. It's all about getting their careers started and getting them to a place that, that I think they're content and they're happy and they've got a good shot at the next 20 years, really. So that, we do CV sessions quite often in the evenings. We do, I've done a fair bit of mock interviewing in the evenings recently. It's that kind of conversation now. And all the different phases are, differently hard, I think, really, when I look back. We've had a family day in ISS today, and we've had everyone from tiny little babies through to teenagers, and it just brings it all back afresh again. But each of those phases brings completely different challenges, and I sort of thought I'd get to them being in their 20s and I could start to relax a little bit, but actually in some ways it's just as hard parenting people, and particularly I think entering the labour market at this point in time is really, really tough. The daughter thing, unfortunately, I lost my mum last year, so the daughter bit was really hard in those last few years, because I know you also had a bereavement this year as well. The daughter bit got harder towards the end, definitely, because did my mum ever really understand what I did? I don't think she did. My dad came from a corporate world. I think he had a much better sort of insight. My mum was desperately proud of all three of us. But I don't think she really necessarily understood exactly what it meant. And so, particularly in the last year or so, where she needed quite a lot of care, that was tough, definitely.
And what did your mum do, if you don't mind me asking?
My mum's one of the reasons that I'm as driven as I am, I think. So my dad was an accountant and a sort of divisional CFO. And I learnt lots from him. I used to go into work with him and sit at his desk, and he was a brilliant manager. My dad was a brilliant manager. His team absolutely loved him. And because he was an accountant, part of it, I guess, he had great morals, so he had a big thing about, never go home and not be able to look yourself in the mirror. And that is really, really, that's always stayed really, really important to me. And I always used to think he was the person who'd sort of set me on the track that I'm on. But actually, my mum was by far the brighter of the two of them. So she was a few years younger than him. She was phenomenally bright. She came from a sort of proud working class background. She was the only one to get into a grammar school. She did really well at school, but felt very quite often marginalised. She was the working class kid in a group of much better off kids. And then she got married to my dad. They had an amazing marriage, just shy of their 50th anniversary when we lost him. And he was fantastic. He was very supportive of her, but she got pregnant within, weeks of being married, and it just wasn't done then. People didn't juggle children. It was seen as, well, obviously the man's not earning enough then, or so she didn't work for a long time. She didn't work. I was the third one, and she didn't go back to work until after me. And she was hugely frustrated, I think, and she could have done so much more. She was so bright. So they ended up working together the last few years of, my dad started his own accountancy firm, and she worked for him for the last few years of their careers. But she lived through my sister and my career. She absolutely lived every moment of that. And I think if I'm proudest of anything, it's probably making her proud.
I'm rarely speechless, as the team would tell you, but it's just such a beautiful story, and it particularly resonates because having recently lost my father, who was a huge inspiration, you almost start to question after
Yeah.
something like that happens. Oh my goodness, motivations
Yeah.
and the why
Yeah.
behind the the things that you do every single day,
Yeah.
and it's not until
Yeah.
they're gone that, well, they sadly say that when you lose a parent, you lose part of your childhood. And honestly, I think much of that is true.
Yeah, I do. I felt it when I lost my dad, and then again, your axis changes, doesn't it? You know, you're rotating on one axis, and then all of a sudden
Absolutely.
you're not there. And there isn't a day goes by that I don't want to pick the phone up to tell her either what I've been up to. She'd have loved me coming to Downing Street with you guys. That would have been, that would have been huge with her friends. She'd have been on the phone to all of them that night. And, there's not a moment goes by that I don't want to tell her. And also, what my kids are accomplishing as well now, probably even more so. But it's interesting. We'll come on to privilege, won't we? But I think that is the biggest privilege I had, was I had two parents who, loved each other, which was important, loved us, but were also very pushy and ambitious with us. They were supportive, very supportive. But, there was never a consideration that we weren't all three going to university and we weren't all three going to have careers. And, my father, I think, was very keen on making sure that his two daughters were just as driven and as ambitious as his son. There was absolute equality in our household, in a world where it wasn't really like that 30 years ago, 40 years ago.
You can see the profound impact that your parents have had on the success throughout that journey. And just picking up on something that you mentioned around the family day here at ISS, because when I walked through the door, honestly, I actually said, oh my goodness, I think my ovaries are going to explode. I'm like literally so hormonal, like all these children everywhere. But things like this are so important. It's celebrating those different life milestones, ultimately, from birth through to sadly death, but also the celebration of life and being there at those pivotal moments, which really shape one's career.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we've done today, to me, is phenomenal, because as working parents, we leave the door in the morning and we don't come home to the evening, and if you've got no idea what happens in between that, I think it can be quite scary, really, can't it? And I think it's so important getting children in to see their mums and dads in their work environment. These people that you talk about casually over dinner, actually getting to meet them and see them. And I know, mine came into work with me quite a lot when they were small. And, there's things they still remember today from those times. And you just don't realise what they're taking in. And I'll tell it quickly, but I'll tell a story about
please do.
My daughter. I'd forgotten. I used to take them both to the school bus, but my son's school bus went half an hour before my daughter's. So quite often she was sat in the back of the car, bored for half an hour before her bus turned up, or before I could drop her at school, maybe. And I worked for an American company at the time, and we were having quite a lot of early morning calls over a deal that I was trying to get through the governance, and I was having a really, really hard time because we'd had a similar deal that hadn't gone very well. And I'm on the call to them, and she's in the back, and she's got her iPad, and she's kind of not really paying attention, or so I thought. And I hang up the call, and she didn't even look at me, and she just went, well, it's obvious why they don't want you to do it, Mom. And I went, what on earth do you mean? And she said, well, because you made such a mess of that other one. They're not going to let you do it again, are they? She was 10 at the time, and she'd actually understood the context of the call better than most of my team at that time. And I just think it's, you don't know what they're taking in. And I just think it's so important that you get those moments that they'll look back and think, now I understand that. Yeah, I understand that dynamic. So I've always talked about work with them and talked about the conflicts and the challenges and whatever, and got their views on them, because I just think it's really important that you start to wire that work ethic in, I guess. And I had that, as I say, I used to sit on my dad's desk and talk to his team.
I will tell a very, very brief story, because actually this is very much about you and your story. But I've just come back from Hong Kong, and I'd gone to Hong Kong, ended up doing a little, had a couple of business meetings whilst out there. But my primary reason for going was to scatter my father's ashes. And he often talked about this guy that he used to work for called Mr. Mark. And over Christmases, Easters, everything. It was always the stories about Hong Kong. And we'd say, oh, Dad, tell us another story about Mr. Mock. And he'd say, well, Mr. Mock and, say business cards, for example, you must present business cards like this. He has an Australian, came into a meeting, he threw the business card over the table and he said, oh no, he knows he's never going to do business with him. Anyhow, when Dad passed away recently, and he'd actually sent me an email a couple of years ago, and it's one of the only regrets that I have in my life is that I had not reached out sooner to his old boss's daughter. And we're going back like 20 years here, back when Hong Kong was British colony and they lived out there. Anyhow, I ended up tracking down his daughter, so I went to meet her last week in Hong Kong and retraced some of Dad's footsteps, took a picture above right by his old company logo and things like this. And
amazing.
Some of the moments, I mean, I tell you, I've never cried so much my entire life over 4 days, eaten and cried my way around Hong Kong. But the story that you told there about how actually there's the sharing when you're young, business, work, life. I mean, we talk a lot about business and, work-life balance and things like this. And I don't know yet really where I sit on that, because I think so much of life is a blend of different things. And actually, some of the fondest memories I have of Dad is when he's excitedly kind of, and you can see the twinkle in his eye talking about different stories of, when he went off and went to China and did business with so-and-so. And it's just, it's what you remember, and those memories of the things that we hold dear and that we take with us wherever we go.
And they form you, don't they? Those memories are the things that form you. It's interesting you say this about the work-life balance thing, because the frustration for me at the moment, I think, is it post-pandemic? Was pandemic an escalation, an acceleration of a whole load of things? I'm sure it was. But my frustration at the moment is much of the rhetoric is almost work bad, life good, so get out of work as quickly as you can, get home and do your fun stuff. Whereas I have loved, nearly every minute of my career so far. Of course, there's some more challenging bits and there's a few difficult times, but I've largely loved it, and I've made friends and I've laughed and I've had pride and satisfaction and all of that. And it's almost become a bit of a taboo to say that you're actually driven and ambitious and you like work. And yes, of course, I'm really pleased that it's easier for people now to manage childcare. There were some nightmare times where it really was quite difficult to do. And I'm really pleased that we can create environments for a much broader set of people to thrive now. That is all fantastic. But let's not lose that little bit that says, actually, this can be really good fun as well, and really, really satisfying and rewarding. I don't know,
You're making absolute sense. I'm nodding here profusely, because, again, it resonates a huge amount with me. And I think there is a lot of, I think part of it's the media, actually. And, had this very same conversation with a CEO friend of mine. He said, well, we've got to listen to the goods and the bads and then make a well-informed decision. And ultimately the media has got a big part to play in this polarizing narrative. It's the same at
I agree.
Conversations at Downing Street, where we talked about, kind of the diversity of commercial lever. There are people that would say, well, why? Why would you talk about that? It's a nice to have, it's a moral issue, but there's opinions, good, bad, indifferent, why aren't we allowed to have opinions, about things these days? It shouldn't be the fear behind that, because otherwise we're never going to get anywhere. There's, great things that can happen within business, great friendships can happen within business.
Exactly. When you look back, I did meet my husband at work. Most of my long-term friends were a work connection one way or another as well. And I do worry that the environment we're in at the moment, where, we're still 40, 50% occupancy in most workplaces, are those just entering the workforce now really going to get that experience? I really hope so. And I think we create it here most days, actually, in this building, which I'm really, really proud of, and I think it's really important. But we've all got to lean into that a bit more, I think.
Absolutely. So let's talk about CEO activism. We've talked a lot here, and I, honestly, I'm connecting so much with the personal stories and the professional stories. But CEO activism, again, could be could be quite a opinionated term.
Yeah.
What does
Yeah.
activism mean?
Yeah.
But what does CEO activism mean to you, Liz?
So I think we talked a little bit about privilege and what got us here and so far. Park all of that for a minute. The fact that I am here now and I'm in a position where, I mean, I've got nowhere near as many followers as you, but I've got a decent social media following.
Stop. You are literally absolutely rocking it. I see you. I see you.
So, you've got a presence, you've got a voice. I've got, 30,000 people who every day, rely on the decisions that I make to keep them in work. So you've actually got a platform that you can start to do something now and be heard. We've got very influential clients. We are a strategic supplier to government here in the UK, so we have a voice through that. And I think it would be completely wrong of me not to use that voice to move forward some topics that I feel passionately about and that ISS feels passionately about as well. And I am really fortunate at the moment that those two things collide probably a lot more than they have in any other company that I've worked for before. So, what ISS wants to achieve in our social agenda and what I want to achieve myself are actually very, very aligned. So that, to me, activism is using whatever got you here. It's then using that platform to do some of the right things and some of the things that you're really passionate around. And I guess on my whole sort of D&I journey started with gender. So I go back. 2014 was a sort of pivotal year for me. So I did do very male-dominated career path up until that point. So I did an engineering degree. We were about 5% female on my course. I was sponsored by Jaguar. Again, I was the only. There were two of us on the whole program, I think. I came up through engineering again, being the only woman. I then went into technology, which again, massively male dominated. And I didn't really, I guess I got blinkers on. It was working for me. I was doing well. I was getting the projects that I wanted. I was getting the promotions. I'd had my kids. I'd sort of sailed through that bit really. And I'd avoided all of these groups that talked about, I didn't want to be sort of ghettoised as a woman and whatever. And I'd avoided joining all of these groups, or I'd done the absolute bare minimum. And then I suddenly am on the exec board of the company, and the board is giving us grief over we're not doing enough around D&I, and they want to start with gender, and I'm the only woman on the exec board, and everyone's looking around saying, who's going to do this then? And I start off thinking, I don't want it to be me. And then I kind of think, oh my God, if one of them does it, it's going to be dreadful. It's going to be embarrassing. And I'm going to have to pretend I'm on board with it. And that was my motivation for going, literally, for God's sake, I'll do it. And I then kind of, and it was a real epiphany for me, because I kind of thought, right, if I'm going to do this, I want to really do this. I don't just want a group that chats about it. And so if we're going to do it, we're going to really move the dial. We're going to set some goals. We're going to set, proper measurable goals like we would on any other business objective. And therefore I need data. And so I buried myself. And there were some really dreadful moments for me. So I hadn't realised at that point. This was when the 30% Club was really just taking off around getting women onto boards. But I was looking the layer below that at the executive layer, and it was 9%. In the FTSE, it was 9% of executives are female. That can't be right. Dig down again. No, it's right. And it hasn't moved for, 10 years by then. And then I think that must be a UK thing. So I look in other countries, states, again, 9%, look everywhere else. Nobody's exceeding double figures. I then start looking at government, and I start looking at the NHS, and I start looking at the army, and then I think charities. Surely charities have got it right. Absolutely not. At that exec layer, and actually, I think one of the problems with the 30% Club is it gave an alternative to hitting that exec layer, so people could actually opt out a bit earlier and become a non-exec. And miss those sort of vital years as an exec. And therefore, horrifically, that number still hasn't changed. I mean, I think we were celebrating this week because we got the 10th CEO on the FTSE 100 again. We'd gone down to 9, we're back at 10, and we're kind of celebrating, hey, we've got 10 of 10 out of 100. I mean, how can we defend that after all this time? It's terrible.
It's
So
bittersweet, really, isn't it?
it
It's
is.
a
You know, of course,
very...
it's great. You know,
Mhm.
one more is great. But you know, 10 out of 100, it's really shocking. So that was kind of one of my big moments of realizing if we're going to do this, you've got to do it properly, and that means you've got to treat it like all of your other business objectives. It can't be, you know, I do P&L during the day, I do, you know, growth and cash and whatever, and then, you know, on the side of my desk I do something frilly around D&I. So I think, you know, gender was my sort of first foray into this, and I think, you know, what I've then realised is that the things that apply to gender absolutely apply in spades to other aspects of diversity, and then it makes you reflect on your own progression as well. And at that time, I was struggling. I was the only woman on that team. And I was struggling to get my voice heard. And it was that classic, I would say something and nobody would pick up on it. And then 5 minutes later, one of the guys around the table would say the same thing, you know, in slightly different words. And everyone, oh, it's a great idea.
Amazing idea, yeah.
Yeah. It's just literally, what am I doing? And I think that was a very sort of formative couple of years for me, really working there. And my analogy, and I'm sorry, this is a bit, again, this comes from my favourite sport is skiing. I love skiing. I went as a kid. I've been all the way. It was one of the things my dad never got a chance to do, and he really wanted us to do it. So he sent me on school ski trips and whatever. And on a lovely sunny day, I am a brilliant skier, and I know I am. I can ski down anything, and the wind's in my face, and I absolutely love it. But on a whiteout, you know, when it's snowy and you can't see more than a foot in front of you, in my head, I don't think, oh, it's the conditions. I think it's me, and I doubt myself, and I doubt my ability. Well, I know I'm the same person on the sunny day and the whiteout day, but it's that environment that I turn back on myself, and I criticise myself. And that's what I was finding in the workplace is sort of designed to be a sunny, lovely day for some people, and it's designed to be a whiteout for others. And that's got nothing to do with the different abilities of those two people. It's just about the context in which they're operating. So what I am now trying to do through my role here at ISS is make sure that it's a sunny day for everybody, whatever that means for them, you know, and then it's up to them, you know, then they've got to take it forward, and it is their ability and their commitment and their drive and their passion and whatever. But that's what we need to do, is make it a sunny, you know, the conditions be the same for everybody.
That is a great analogy. You've articulated that really well, in particular with equity, ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it is that bit that you throw it back on yourself. You know, I never ever blame the weather. I always blame oh God, if I got myself fitter, if I'd lost that half a stone before I came on the holiday, or, you know, you blame yourself. And I was finding that I'm sitting in this meeting and nobody's listening to me, and I'm not thinking there's something wrong with this environment. I'm thinking there's something wrong with me. And unfortunately, I think that's how this works, isn't it? Is people internalise it. Mm-hmm. And actually what we need to do is just create an environment where you never have that dark voice in your head that's saying it's you.
Absolutely. And I think it's also a huge benefit having a peer network.
Absolutely. Yeah.
In particular, other brilliant CEOs, other brilliant leaders who are there to be able to share the journey. And, you know, it can be, you know, as you've described so articulately, it can be a really lonely and isolating place.
Yeah.
The higher you go in the corporate hierarchy, not only the lower and the lower diversity in all of its different guises, but also it's a lonely place.
Yeah. And it is. And you know, you and I have had some great challenging conversations, and that's what you need, and also some reassuring ones as well. And what I'm loving with what you're doing with getting us all together, and it's a self-selecting team to a degree, isn't it? It's because it's people who are passionate about this, about the value of inclusion and equity. So I've had some great conversations that, you know, and from really different sectors, but but coming together on this one topic where there is a lot of intersectionality between what a bank does, what a retailer does, what somebody in a services organisation like ourselves does as well. So I think it's really good from that, just having people who are going through the same things that you are, and taking away that feeling of it's just me, I'm alone. But also just really practical stuff as well. There were 2 or 3 things I picked up that day. My team always hate me going out to things like that because I come back going, oh, and we could do this and we could do this. But I think there were 3 very, very practical things that I picked up on immediately. So it's both the more ephemeral bit and the very, very tangible practical bit. Mm-hmm.
I have to ask the question, if you don't mind. We've talked about the route to becoming a CEO, the profound impact that family and those around you have had on your drive to getting to where you are. But is there anyone that you would say has almost been an activist in your life, personally and or professionally, that shone a light during those dark times? Because there are ups and downs, in particular in roles like this.
Yeah. So actually, the person I rarely mention is my husband, actually, and I probably should mention him because we got together when we were 19, so just before we went to university, and we've been together all the way through. And from day dot, we always agreed we would have 2 careers. We wouldn't have a lead career and a secondary career. We would have 2 careers, and he has protected my ability to do that probably more strongly than anyone else. And we're at slightly different stages now. He would like to retire, and I can never see myself really retiring. So we're at a slightly different phase at the moment. But he has always been the person who's helped me think things through, remove the obstacles, and for that I'm very, 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 very grateful. I probably don't tell him often enough, but I am very, very grateful. So he's been a big part. He's been my enabler because we've not had that. I read articles about the chores, chores at home separately shared out and whatever. We do different things, but we certainly do our fair share each. He never bought into this. He was babysitting the kids as a favour to me. He was parenting, he was co-parenting, and he did his fair share of the pickups and the drop-offs and all of that. And he wanted to. And I think his relationship with our children is so much better for that. So I think there's been some upsides to him. I do think there's been some downsides to him as well, though. I do think it was a taboo. He went up through he was in consulting. He went up through the Big 5 route. And he did get to partner, but in the route to that, suddenly saying, I'm really sorry, my kid's off sick, being sent home from school sick, and I need to leave this meeting now, had a bigger impact on him than it did on me, surprisingly. And the comments would be, can't your wife do that? He's like, well, no, my wife's quite busy actually. So him, and then in the work environment, I'm a bit the same with mentors, really. It's arms and legs of people. It's not one person, but there are things I've learned. I think I quite early on realised that no one is perfect, but actually if you can learn one aspect that somebody does really, really well and learn from that and then turn to a different person for a different aspect. But the bit I would go back to is I went to this startup, and we grew very, very rapidly. It was a really fun time. We were doubling in size every year. In the lead up to year 2K, we were a tech company. We were doing really, really well. And at the height of the boom, we got bought by a much more sort of long established, great reputation with the city company, run primarily by women. So the most of the exec board was female. The chief exec was. In fact, it was almost the reverse of a lot of companies. The HR director was male, and pretty much the rest of the exec team were female. So really inspirational bunch of women, and I learned again different things from each of them. But the chief exec there was absolutely phenomenal, and she was definitely a big part of forming me, I guess, into being a leader. She was also very early on to this whole thing about, can you make activism work as a commercial lever? So she invested very, very early into India. So this was when before the IT world really moved offshore to India. And she bought an Indian company. Nobody knew what the hell why she was doing it, what she was doing it for. So that in itself was fairly groundbreaking. But also she invested in a charity that was helping to educate girls in India. And again, this is 30 years ago now, so this is way before anybody else was doing it.
Forward thinking.
And she built it into contracts. So with customers, that if for every £10,000 you spend with us or whatever, we'll fund one girl through school in India, and we can get you to meet them. We can fly you out to India, we can show you our facility, we'll take you to a school, you'll get to meet the children that you're investing in. And so it's a really early lesson in the fact that this can be commercial. It can be commercialised. And what's your phrase, that you can do good by
do well by doing good.
Do well by doing good. It was a really very early example for me of how you do that. But she was she was a learning curve for me in so many different ways. She was very, very tough. So she had a thing around, if you're 5% over your forecast, it's as bad as if you're under, because you're still out of control. So she really taught me how to run a P&L properly, and you fall back on all the time. She was a great one for her praise. Was you were desperate for her praise, because it came out so little, but when it did, oh my God, was it absolutely on the mark, and did it mean a lot to you? But she was also, I remember my second child, I was pregnant, and I didn't work directly for her, I worked for somebody else. I'd told him very early on, and he had told her. This was before I'd told my parents, just because I'd not seen them, I wanted to tell them in person. And I walk into a big conference, 250 people, and she's on a balcony up above me, and she shouts, "Liz, brilliant!" And of course everyone turns around, and then I'm kind of having to tell 250 people that I've had a baby before. So her whole thing about the bringing the personal to work, again was but she was also the one who told me. I came back after 2 weeks holiday with said children, and was feeling a bit grumpy, because I was leaving them behind for the first time in 2 weeks. And she walked in and she said, "What on earth is up with you?" And I said, "Well, I'm missing the kids. I've had 2 weeks with them." And she said, "You'd make a terrible full-time mother. Don't even think about it." And she was right. She was absolutely right. So she was a fantastic role model. And actually that company, and have you ever met Dame Stephanie Shirley?
I haven't.
So you should. So again, she's on the Diary of a CEO podcast. You should listen. It's a really great podcast. But Dame Stephanie, so the company I worked for, she founded. She'd retired by the time I went to work there. But she, if you ever want to be blown away by somebody, she came across on the Kinder transports at the start of the Second World War. Her and her sister, so her parents put them on the train, sent them over here. So she grew up. She wanted to be. She's a fantastic mathematician. And she went to work for one of the big tech companies at the time. And then when she had a baby, it was almost, she was literally given a sort of P45. Of course, you won't want to work anymore, will you? Go, there you go. So she started her own tech company in the early 50s, I think it was, aimed at getting women back into the workplace. So it was all based on working from home. So at the time it was punch cards, programming computers through punch cards. So she'd distribute the punch cards out to her programmers wherever they lived, and they'd do this. And they were doing things like, they programmed Concorde. I mean, they weren't doing sort of sideline things. They were doing like real-time computing on amazing things. And then she built up this massive, massive empire. And then she gave up quite early on to become a full-time philanthropist, and her story is amazing. She's the first person to actively be delisted from the Times rich list, because she's given so much money away by now. And that is, and so you should. And again, I have met her a couple of times at various events. But again, and that was the ethos of this company. And again, it goes back to that tone at the top, and that was the company that she founded. Absolutely amazing.
Absolutely phenomenal. And Liz, you are absolutely phenomenal yourself. Honestly.
On a good day, maybe.
The work that you do makes a difference to so many people. It really, really does. And I can't tell you how fulfilling it is just spending this time with you and hearing the candid honesty, the ups, the downs, the route to success and what that means ultimately.
I think, I talk about it, it's all come together with this job at ISS. And I think it's because here, this is absolutely our core business. We employ 30,000 people in the UK, we employ 350,000 across the world. And because of the nature of what we do, a lot of the time, the job they get with us is the job an individual gets with us is the difference from living a life in poverty to that first step on something that can become, it can become a job, and then it can become a career if that's what the individual wants. And that is so powerful. But also, we employ 350,000 people across the world. I think even in the UK, we're up to something like 170 languages spoken. We've got people from all sorts of educational backgrounds. We've got people from all sorts of culture, race, ethnicity. We embrace people with all sorts of different abilities as well. And it is the first time, I feel like I came home when I joined here, because it is so important to us in everything that we do. And again, it is that whole thing about what do we need to do to create an environment where you can thrive, and we can give you, and our strapline is this place to be you, but one of our core values is giving people what they need to become who they want to be. And that might be that you're very happy doing what you're doing, and we just need to make sure we pay you correctly and we keep you safe. And that's lovely. But it can also be that you want to do that bit more. And if me telling my story helps one of those people to think, actually, that could be me, or something like that could be me, then it's worth it.
So final question before I do my best to summarise, which already I'm thinking, how do I summarise all of the learning lessons from our conversation today? But what would you say is your secret to success?
Oh, wow. I think, and again, it goes back to this whole thing about realising what your superpowers are. I, for a long time now, have fallen out with the way we define leadership. I don't think the way the Western world particularly defines leadership is the right model. I think it favours a certain type of leadership, which actually is very disempowering to the people beneath it. So it's the big egos who think they know the answers, and I think I very quickly realised that I couldn't be that. It just didn't sit comfortably with me. It didn't meet my dad's test of, can you look yourself in the mirror? And what I realised was that what I've got is different, but it's just as good, because I think and actually what's interesting now is there's all this talk now about empathetic leadership, and I read it and I think that's what I've been doing. It's about creating an environment that other people can thrive. So I think my superpower is that I'm not. I fortunately wasn't formed in that mould of the leadership role model that's been in fashion, I would say, probably for the last couple of 100 years. I think somebody once said to me, the problem is, Liz, you're a 21st century leader, but most of the world's stuck in the 20th century. And I kind of feel that I'm coming of age now where that's really relevant.
Well, I completely agree, obviously. But I think it's a really pertinent point, the sharing of the story and also the creation of that safe space, because ultimately that leadership and that honesty and vulnerability almost, it starts at the top and it trickles down very, very quickly when it is at the top first and foremost. And coming back a little to something you'd mentioned around your husband, and that you decided very early on that you would both have your careers, takes me to thinking about me and my husband when he took a couple of weeks off, and perhaps hopefully his company's not watching, but the culture was so that he felt he needed to go back after a couple of weeks. He felt he needed to go back because he didn't want to be overlooked. So whether you have policies and procedures and everything like that in place versus also the hearts, the minds, the storytelling, you have the data, etc. There's multiple different pieces that are required in order for that to really translate into the roots and the branches of the organisation, which is what you do so very well, is creating that safe space. Because even if you have some of these pieces in place, and the culture is so
Yeah.
that people don't feel that, or it might be looked down upon or
Yeah.
frowned upon, that
Yeah.
they're to take that time, then it will never stick.
Yeah.
So,
and my favourite quote on gender balance is one of the suffragettes, and it's, "We have to free the women so they can free the other 50% of the world, the men." And I do think that that's a big thing for us. If we can make the men in our organisations feel just as comfortable about taking paternity leave, which the take-up stats are still terrible, shared parental leave is still terrible. If we can make everyone feel as comfortable, that's when I think we'll hit a real breakthrough point. And it hurts me that your husband still feels like that at the end of 2 weeks. He's starting to worry again. Again, we've not made enough progress, therefore, have we? But that's why we're still having these conversations.
Absolutely. But then it's also the automotive
Yeah.
arena, and that
Yeah.
is exactly why
Yeah.
what you've done on this journey is so tremendous, and you've got to keep out there, because it can be an exhausting job at
Yeah.
times,
Yeah.
sharing, but ultimately
Yeah.
what you do is making a huge impact, and I, for one, am incredibly grateful to have had you join us today, because there's been so many things that have been learned.
Well, no, really enjoyed it. Lovely to talk.
Thanks so much, Liz.